Hello, I'm Cameron Cullen. Behind me is the Overbrook Asylum, a psychiatric hospital that cared and housed for mentally and physically handicapped patients. Overbrook was in service for over 110 years before becoming fully unoccupied and abandoned in 2006. As you can see, many of its buildings remain standing today. What people may not know is not even a half a mile away, on top of the second Washoe Mountain, the highest point in Essex County, lies the Sanatorium, a mysterious complex hidden and unknown to the residents of the townships. Most people knew the legend rather than the truth, and now I'll be telling you about the rich history of the Essex Mountain Sanatorium. Tuberculosis is nearly as old as mankind itself, discovered from human remains from the Neolithic era dating back from 9,000 years ago. In the 17th century, an epidemic in Europe accounted for nearly 25% of all adult deaths and lasted nearly 200 years. In the late 1800s, a discovery showed that tuberculosis was contagious, and laws segregating the afflicted were made. In 1873, the Newark City Home was established. It consisted of over 56 total acres, a three-story main building with the north and south wings, constructed on the eastern slope of the second range of the Washoe Mountains. At the time, it was the largest building in Verona Valley. The Newark City Home was an orphanage for boys and girls, particularly for kids trending in a downward path. The kids were referred to as inmates, and they were expected to stay there until 21. The Newark City Home had a weird form of punishment called the electric cat. They were shocked into behaving themselves. It seemed to work, with the punishment never being repeated on the same kid. On January 19, 1900, a fire began at the Newark City Home. None of the 182 boys or the 18 girls were injured. The fire completely destroyed the Newark City Home, and some of the kids were provided shelter here at the Overbrook Insane Asylum, while others were provided shelter at the penitentiary in North Caldwell. This was a short-term solution for a long-term problem. At the time, Verona had no fire department. The Newark City Home had 12 fire extinguishers, a hose, and a water tank containing 7,000 gallons, all of which were inside that main building, thus being useless. The fire was probably caused by overheating of the bakery fumes that exited through the roof. A line of 75 boys formed to make a bucket brigade. It didn't help. Some of the boys took this opportunity to escape, and between 3 to 25 boys did so. On January 12th, Mayor James Seymour and the City Board of Trustees decided that one building wasn't safe. The rebuilding should follow the cottage plan, modeled after the Glen Mills Reformatory in Pennsylvania. Under the plan, boys and girls are segregated into separate cottages and grouped into families consisting of no more than 50 children. The new site of the boys' cottage opens on the former grounds of the Newark City Home. Now with over 100 acres, it was equipped with a smokehouse, a slaughterhouse, and even a cow barn. Today, it's the site of the Verona High School. The Newark City Home for girls was built on the crest of the second Washoe Mountain in Verona. The building was opened in December 1901, but there were not many girl delinquents. After receiving no girls in 1905, the cottage was shut down and the building sat dormant. In February 1907, Mrs. Edwin Preith, a charitable woman from Montclair, had one of her employees' husbands very ill with tuberculosis. Mrs. Preith and her neighbor Mary Wilson offered to pay for hospitalization for the man. The two women looked into hospitals that treated tuberculosis and found the terrible conditions of the patients under the Newark Board of Health's care. The women found a young man dying alone in the basement of a downtown restaurant with no money or food, his bedding a Board of Health blanket. The Board of Health explained they were not in the position to care for the man. Only 2 hospitals in Newark cared for the people suffering from tuberculosis. The 2 women were presented with a waiting list. At least 3,000 cases of tuberculosis in the city and 842 deaths from the disease, the Board of Health was hopeless to cope with the growing epidemic unless an adequate facility could be provided. It became a question of where. Mary Wilson thought she found the answer when walking along the ridge of the first mountain near the Montclair Hotel.
Looking across the valley, my attention was suddenly held by the glorious colors of the evening sunset as it reflected into the windows of the abandoned girls' home. Like an inspiration, the conviction came. The building is unoccupied. It is owned by the city. The location is ideal. Why not?
With tuberculosis spreading through Essex County, the site was converted into a sanatorium in 1907, against the wishes of most residents. Under the direction of the two women, Officer David Chandler went before the Newark Common Council and proposed to transfer the building and 15 acres of land to the Newark Board of Health to be used as a sanatorium. When asked about the location, Mr. Chandler replied,
"It's like finding diamonds in the rough. It is splendid. In fact, Caldwell is now considered to be the next Denver for beneficial results."
Its location was at the highest point in Essex County, on top of the second Watchung Mountain. It was believed to be beneficial due to its fresh, crisp air, much comparable to Colorado Springs and Denver and their rehabilitation centers. From Trenton, it seemed that the Assembly Bill number 384 would be passing with no problems. It turned out that the bill, it's dead. It turned out that the bill died while going through the committee. The two women hurried back to Trenton and learned that the Verona property owners were objecting and that the word was out to kill Assembly 384. They were even offered a bribe to drop interest. Focused, the two women spoke to every committee member, and their campaign finally succeeded getting the bill before the House, passing by one vote. By this time, the women's hard work had won them friends in high places. With the help of Senator Joseph Sherman Frelinghuysen Sr. and the entire Senate, pledged their support to help them. Now Bill number 384 was once again found and passed unanimously. The bill was given to Governor Edward C. Stokes to sign. Mrs. Preeth stated,
"This is the beginning of a great crusade in which all cities must one day join."
It now seemed that the city of Newark would at long last get its tuberculosis sanatorium. In November of 1907, protesters laid plans for an injunction as their last effort. Dr. Edward I. Gluckman was chosen as superintendent. Anticipating the protest, Dr. Gluckman moved several patients into the building at midnight under the cover of darkness. Thus, the Newark City Home for Consumptives was established. However, those first few pioneers could not stay long. The walls were severely cracked, and the entire building was in need of renovation. On January 21, 1908, the Newark Tuberculosis Sanatorium at Verona was reopened for patients. It had a capacity of 80 beds and had a waiting list of 25 to 30 seeking admission. Still, there were estimated anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 cases of tuberculosis in Newark. At that time, around 1908, the illness was only recently put on the contagious disease list. More attention was needed, and the sanatorium needed to become bigger. Between 1913 and 1916, Essex County had an average of 1,023 annual deaths from tuberculosis and only 326 beds. Laws were passed in New Jersey requiring one bed for every death, meaning 697 more beds were required. The Verona Sanatorium needed to be expanded and sought to be bought by the county. The Essex County Board of Freeholders agreed to purchase the sanatorium and 32 acres of land for $32,000, which went back to the city of Newark. Before the county was able to expand the facility, the Spanish influenza pandemic of 1918 resulted in the need for temporary shacks and tents on the sanatorium grounds. A new updated water system was needed. A 135-foot tall water tower with a capacity of 50,638 gallons was built on the northern end of the property. As the sanatorium grew, the need for more water increased, and 2 years later an identical sister tower was added. During the fall of 1918, the Essex Mountain Sanatorium saw an influx of soldiers returning from World War I with lung-related problems. The institution would become a haven for war veterans who suffered from lung injuries. For the most part, the Essex Mountain Sanatorium was typically used for curable cases of tuberculosis. The terminal cases were housed at the County Isolation Hospital in Belleville. The first stage of the expansion began in 1917, when 11 new buildings were added. These facilities became available to patients in 1922. Construction of the new hospital building was being completed at this time. Later, this was referred to as the infirmary building. The infirmary would hold 132 beds. 4 pavilions were also built, each holding 24 beds. 3 industrial buildings were developed at the southeast corner of the property, apart from the main complex. They were used as a laundry building, a boiler house, and a maintenance garage. These buildings were made of a plain red brick, not white, like the rest of the complex. By 1925, the complex grew to 12 buildings. It now had paved roads with lawns and plantings. The sanatorium's design was inspired by the spa movement. This gave the complex the feeling of a health resort when realistically it was a large-scale hospital. The color white gave the institution a more sterile and sanitary appearance. By the mid-1920s, the second water tower was installed on the property. Fresh air and sunlight were vital for treatment, so proper ventilation was required. The infirmary's large windows were kept open year-round, regardless of the temperature. This was because during the time, and in fact they were correct, physicians believed that the same recirculated air would cause the tuberculosis patients to relapse if the windows were shut. By 1925, the sanatorium was nearing its 400th death since the county's acquisition. Nearly 25% of those who entered the institution died. In the later half of the 1920s, the National Tuberculosis Association made a call for more beds. In addition, other recommendations included making the Essex Mountain Sanatorium responsible for caring for all stages of the disease. That required even more buildings being built. The County Isolation Hospital in Belleville was no longer serving patients with tuberculosis, as they all went to the Essex Mountain Sanatorium now. More beds were wanted, and the idea of a children's building was being discussed, but fell through following the final construction process in 1930. The new hospital building was the largest of the complex and had an additional 136 beds, bringing the Essex Mountain Sanatorium to 422 total beds. The sanatorium can now offer treatment to over 700 patients annually in all stages of the disease. The new auditorium allowed activities that were not possible in the sanatorium's past. Movies were shown weekly. There were also volunteer performances by bands, choirs, and drama clubs. The extremely ill patients could listen from bedside through a broadcasted radio hookup. There was even a sanatorium school, which assisted patients whose education was interrupted by illness. The curriculum ranged from primary studies through high school standards. The sanatorium store was created in 1931 to supply patients with small personal items and novelties. When the 12-year expansion and building campaign concluded in 1930, the sanatorium consisted of 20 buildings on over 200 acres. Steam, water, and electricity were supplied to the new structures by a network of underground tunnels. The City Home cottage now served as the administration building. Besides for the parking lot area added in the 1940s, the plot plan would remain unchanged for 63 years until 1993. Patient rooms were relatively small, just under 90 square feet, and contained a single bed, sink, chair, nightstand, and dresser. The main kitchen was constructed in the 1920s and only accommodated for 220 consumptives, and needed renovations to expand the facility to care for all 422 patients. Many nurses themselves were survivors of tuberculosis. While only a small percentage contracted the disease while working, many were recruited by sanatoriums seeking to find positions for their ex-patients. By 1935, the waiting list was again at 80 patients. When further expansions were denied by the county, the porches along the top floor of the hospital building were enclosed to allow for 24 more patients. Now the sanatorium's bed capacity increased to 446. In 1936, Michael Lenson was chosen as the artist to paint a 75 by 16-foot wall in the dining hall. The mural, which took Lenson and his staff of 4 assistants a year and a half to complete, was comprised of 3 separate sections. The entire mural together was 1,044 square feet, making it one of the largest put up by the WA project in the country. Unfortunately, due to renovations of the dining hall during the 1940s and 50s, the mural was completely destroyed, never to be seen again. Laws concerning tuberculosis were very strict at the time. If a resident of Essex County was diagnosed with tuberculosis, they could be removed from their loved ones and forced to enter the institution. Visiting hours were on Sunday, but only behind a glass window. Personal possessions were not allowed in the entry ward as space was limited. Patients were issued hospital gowns, which solved the problem of laundering, and it also discouraged them from running away. If they left without permission, the police would return them to the sanatorium, where they would be confined in a locked ward. Upon entry to the institution, most people were underweight and malnourished. Diets in high fat and calories were believed to promote weight gain and good nutrition. Patients well enough were required to spend as much time as possible outdoors. By 1936, nearly 40,000 treatments were given for tuberculosis. Pneumothorax involved the injection of nitrogen into the chest cavity through a puncture or incision until the lung collapsed, essentially squeezing the organ out like a sponge, allowing for the emptying of the tubercle cavities. If the patient did not respond well to the treatment and continued to deteriorate, they were transferred to Ward D, which was a kind of critical care area. Patients dreaded this ward, calling it Death Valley. It often meant succumbing to the disease was imminent. The Sanatorium magazine, The Buzzer, was published on the first day each month throughout the year. An average of 10,000 copies were sold annually and sent to institutions all over the world, including 92 sanatoriums and 71 general hospitals. The first antibiotic to be found effective against the bacteria was streptomycin, which was isolated from a pot of farmland soil on October 19, 1943 in the laboratory of Selman and Waxman at Rutgers University. Known as the second great antibiotic, streptomycin became the first medicinal remedy for pulmonary tuberculosis, making a cure a reality. In 1952, Waxman was awarded the Nobel Prize as its sole discoverer. By the end of the 1950s, a combination of the drugs streptomycin, PAS, and isoniazid had shortened the duration for tuberculosis and markedly decreased the number of people with the disease. Advances in medical research show that the risk of contagion to relatives and others close to those afflicted was very limited once drug treatment began, either in a hospital or home, which effectively ended the sanatorium age. The traditions of fresh air, bed rest, and isolation were now obsolete. The Essex Mountain Sanatorium was no exception. Unlike most things in life, this sanatorium never received a proper sense of closure, and in October of 1970, the final tuberculosis patient was released from the hospital. Many institutions were refitted for different purposes or transformed into general hospitals, while others were just simply abandoned or demolished. A few of the building's vacant wards were being used to care for the overflow of harmless chronic patients from the nearby Overbrook. By the 1970s, as a result of the decline, many of the sanatorium's buildings were no longer in use, and the county found little ways to utilize them. The large open areas of the sanatorium's grounds were used as a compost site for Essex County. With funds from Essex County freeholders and private donations, Turning Point was established on the hilltop when the former male employee home was transformed into a 10-bed residential treatment facility for alcoholics. This building opened up on St. Patrick's Day, March 17, 1975. With additional wards no longer necessary for the care of Overbrook patients, the hospital building closed its doors. And on December 1, 1982, the county decided to lock its doors on the sanatorium, essentially leaving it abandoned and a haven for explorers and vandalists alike for years to come. After the sanatorium's doors were officially closed in 1982, the mystery and superstition began to surround it. Despite its rich history, it operated for over 70 years, isolated on top of its mountain and largely unnoticed by residents. This lack of knowledge about the institution led many curious seekers to the unsecured buildings, and as word began to spread about the abandoned complex, policing the property became more difficult. During the 1980s, the sanatorium was a source for local legends and myths. Stories of apparitions floating down hallways, brains in jars, satanic cult rituals in the chapel, and escaped lunatics that lived in the underground tunnels added to the sanatorium's notoriety and creepy reputation, making it part of both a local folklore and a true urban legend. In July 1993, after a fire at the building abandoned by Turning Point in 1991, part of the building had been torn down, and it became the first building in the complex to be destroyed. Next month, the razing of the main complex began. Although the complex had been eligible for National Register of Historic Place, funding was not available for this preservation. And after years of neglect and abuse, the buildings finally fell to records in 1993, ending an important era in county, state, and national history. It's interesting. We had the opportunity to talk to someone as we came up filming one time. Just a lady who happened to be bird watching. That's one of the main big things that happen actually up here, bird watching, dog walks. But we were passing by and she asked us what we were doing. We told her we were making a documentary on the sanatorium and what it was. She was pretty interested, and she actually asked us a question. She was like, do you know why it took so long for these buildings to fall? My crew and I, we all looked at each other, and we really had no answer. That was something we were looking for a while. We told her we had no idea about this, and what she told us, and it makes perfect sense, is the word is asbestos. After these buildings being abandoned for so long, asbestos being, a major contagious disease, it would cost so much money for these buildings to be torn down by the county, by whoever would be tearing it down. So that's really the main reason why these buildings took forever to fall, because of the amount of money that it would have taken to properly dispose of the ruins that would be left behind by the sanatorium. In 2002, 12,000 signatures were needed to get the attention of then New Jersey Governor Whitman to recognize the hilltop as a park not open for development. The gates, which were closed for 20 years, were unlocked and Hilltop was open to the public. For the first time in 100 years, the second mountain stood empty, as though a century of time was erased. In 2002, Essex County acquired 240 acres of the site for its park system, which is now open to the public. Now in the year 2014, none of these buildings remain, for the exception of a few ruins. Today, the property is no more than a few dog walking paths. The isolation that the sanatorium attained high atop the second mountain made it one of a kind, never to be repeated, paradise in northern New Jersey. I've really learned so much about this place through a variety of different ways, through the internet, of course, but also a big book that was recently published by Richard Kennedy on the Sanatorium. He actually experienced this place during the 80s as the abandoned facility, what it was. And I think that's a big reason why I decided to make this documentary, was to explain, where this building was at one point, one of the finest treatment centers in the entire world, compared to Denver, Colorado for tuberculosis treatment. And it had almost a 50% recovery rate, total recovery rate, which is, I think, it's a great statistic. But, I mean, it's just fascinating to see what this place was and what it turned into now. And it's nice to know that this place also didn't turn into just like another hotel or a strip mall or something like that. I applaud the county for maintaining this place, keeping it as a reservation, as a preservation. It's really fascinating, and it's really tough to come by places like this nowadays, because usually it does turn into those strip malls. Overbrook is certainly scary and beautiful in its own way, but it pales in comparison to the abandoned sanatorium that once stood on the hilltop. And one thing I really want to clarify is that the Essex County Hospital and the Essex Mountain Sanatorium, which was what was the Essex Mountain Sanatorium, were completely two different things. Overbrook was an insane asylum, but what it was what? It was what it was. Okay, so it treated the mentally ill, the mentally handicapped. This place was not for that. I mean, sure, it treated patients, the mentally handicapped, occasionally when there was an overflow of patients down the hill, but this was a treatment center for tuberculosis and to get better, for the most part. So yeah, there's a big difference between the two. They're really not related, and that's why I decided to make this film, because no one knows about this place. It's up in the middle, at the highest point in Essex County. No one knows about it. And I really just wanted to bring the attention to here. Kind of, Overbrook is one thing, but like I said earlier, there's a lot more. It seems there's a lot more myths with this place compared to Overbrook. Overbrook just closed in 2006. This place it was abandoned for over 30 years, and it's really hard to believe. And I hope you saw with all the pictures that were in the video that my crew came up with. It was really interesting. This place is truly unique, so much history, and it's a shame that it's all gone, but at the same time it could have been a lot worse. I think it's kind of good that this place actually fell down, because the myths and all the legends can still remain, and really no one else can experience that than the people who are actually here. And that's what I think is great about all the online sources, all of the books. Not really all the books, but the book that was written on it. These first-hand encounters with this place are truly interesting, truly fascinating. I hope you were able to see that in the documentary. So I'd just like to thank you for that. Yeah, I'd just like to thank everyone who cooperated with us over the past few months for this video. My crew members, I'd like to reach out to them. Richard Kennedy authored the book. I had the opportunity to go back and forth with him for a little bit. Several of the people I talked to, in between walks up here, interviews. It's a great experience, great place. I'd highly recommend going for a walk up here, because the air is pretty fresh. Right, Brandon? I mean, this place, yeah. So yeah, that's really it. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you around.